My chat went.
Yeah, I think it's a little tricky sometimes with sharing the screen. Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today. We have Joel Levitt joining us. We have a bunch of registrants coming in. Hello attendees out there. We'll get started in just another 60 seconds, waiting for a couple more people to join and trickle in. In the meantime, if you want to say hello, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining from in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, please do so. I'm happy to go first. Hello. Awesome, welcome. Another hello. We'll wait for one more hello and then we'll go. Wow, LA, yes, warm and sunny here as always. Awesome. Joining from Nigeria. Wow, welcome. All right, we are at just 2 minutes after the hour here. I'm going to go ahead and start my spiel and then I'll hand it right over to you, Joel. So hello and welcome once again. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins for the maintenance community by Upkeep. Thank you so much to everyone here joining us today. If you're not already a member of the maintenance community Slack group, we would love to have you join us. We will send a link on how to sign up in the chat shortly. Also, a quick plug, we have an event coming up in a couple of weeks that we have been slowly announcing, but are releasing more details over the next day or two. So we'll send through an RSVP form there as well as some more details on that. Today, we have with us Joel Levitt doing a presentation. Joel is a wonderful wealth of knowledge, so we're really excited to hear from him today on CMMS. Joel is also available in the maintenance community Slack group, so he can answer any questions that you have live or after the session today in there. The recording from today's session and the slides that you see here are also going to be shared in the maintenance community Slack. So if there's anyone else you know who would benefit from either the slides, the recording of this webinar, or some of Joel's expertise, please feel free to share it with them. Final piece of housekeeping before we get started, you'll notice that Joel and I are the only ones with our cameras turned on today, as well as our audio turned on today. So if you want to answer any questions that Joel presents throughout the presentation or ask any questions of Joel, please use that chat feature where you're all saying hello on the right side of your screen there. Chat your questions or let me know if there's any technical difficulties going on, and we'll troubleshoot as needed. Final thank you for everyone joining us today. And Joel, I'll hand it right over to you.
Great. So thank you very much, Heather. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk about, I called it CMMS magic, but as I thought about it, it's less magic and more a resource for people. It's more something where you can get other people to really enjoy and support your CMMS. The magic is really in the communicating of the value, and the value is always in service to the mission of whatever you do. If you take kids to school in school buses, presuming the kids are in school, then that's your mission. If you refine oil, that's your mission. So you have to first decide what the value is and what's the value for different people in your organization. Remember, value is different for different folks. And people don't always see the value. And when they do, they'll be in your corner and they'll be, supportive of this. Now, the whole basis of this is work orders. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time here, but you know that when I visit companies around the world, I have to say that your work orders pretty much are not great. That would be putting it mildly. So we really want to make sure the work orders, we take a step up. And if you want to see who does this really well, take your car into a new car dealer and see what they do for a work order. They get everything. the part numbers are right, the asset numbers are right. Of course, you wouldn't pay the bill if they didn't, so they tend to be much more serious about this. But it's a work order, and it's filled out by mechanics, and they do a good job. You want to have updates every year whenever the software updates, and also when your codes update. Make sure you're giving people feedback and provide ongoing, easy access to training. With these platforms like Zoom, it's really easy to just record a presentation over PowerPoint, 5 minutes, about how to fill in, the work request or some of the codes, the failure codes. And you could have a library of these very, very simply and very inexpensively. And to really think about this, consider having a little task force that thinks through all the steps of the work order and makes it more efficient, simpler. Take that money out of that system. In other words, we want to collect accurate, complete data as cheaply as possible. So here's the unacknowledged problem that we have with the CMMS. There's lots of people that use the data in the CMMS, and they use it for different things. And there's no agreement about it because it's really an unacknowledged use. So the work order can have many uses and provide value for many parts of the company. So I want to look at this a little bit. The first place the work order was used in the very first instance was to have a written instructions to the mechanics so they wouldn't forget or do the repair on the wrong asset. The second thing that happened right after that was cost collection for cost analysis. The first CMMS was about 1965 with the MIDAC system, an old card-driven mainframe system for managing lubrication on fork trucks. But the very next thing that was developed was cost collection so that they could allocate costs to assets. It also is used for many people as proof of safety for a safer workplace and proof of compliance to avoid fines. So your environmental people are going to be looking at the CMMS. The safety people look at the CMMS, and they can both use it for managing some of their effort. We all use it for scheduling control document. So it reduces downtime and increases shop effectiveness. It provides history to speed repairs and for training. I would say, I don't know you. I recognize some of the companies, but I don't know you personally, most of you. But I'll bet that you use the work order for authorization for parts and special tools as a accounting control document. It also provides feedback to planners, data for root failure analysis, insurance recovery, warranty recovery, if you have a claim, source of data for hidden demands, and even, evidence in court. I occasionally get called into court cases as a witness, and the first thing I ask for is, let me see the work order where this work was done. And frequently the answer to the whole legal question is right on the work order. So I want to give you 7 concrete ways to communicate, to capture the value and then communicate it. We're going to first talk about discussing work orders with interested parties to improve value. Improved work orders actually make better maintenance workers. And we want to use the system or we'll lose the system. We want to distinguish ready backlog. Breakdowns and downtime can be a friend. In other words, you can use them, uncover and manage hidden demands, and use the CMMS to make contribution to the goals and KPIs of other groups. So I'm going to go through each of these 7 and talk a little bit about what you can do. So work orders with interested parties. We talk to engineering to discuss parts specification, machine manufacturers, the build quality, or how engineering can use maintenance data. I'm always disappointed when new equipment is ordered without reference to the existing data about reliability and robustness and how much the asset will resist breakdown. Trades can use it to look up, what was used, how it was done, how much time it took historically. So the trades can really use the system, and particularly with stuff that's was done 10 years ago or 7 years ago, and nobody really remembers what happened, but the CMMS will remember if you keep it. We want to use it to introduce safety to the package job plans. For me, the planner is the first line of defense against safety problems. So we build safety right into the job plan, so it comes out with a work order. And we can even use, go deal with safety with this and make it even better. And then purchasing in stores, this is a huge usage. Review the parts usage, the reasons, better parts to have lower usage, improving specs, blanket orders, the whole 9 yards. It's all in the work orders. Now, the goal of this is to create a conversation in the listener's mind. So this is a little weird, but here's what I'm thinking of. You want the person you're talking to see something for themselves in this stuff, or thinking this could make my job easier, or we could use this stuff to improve our something, or could we, would this solve my XYZ problem? So the goal is to create a conversation in the other group where they see something for themselves in your CMMS data. Now, once that thought is created, you only have a few minutes, and you want to get the person, be sure to give the person a way to ask for or agree to further action. So, here's a form to request a customized report. Here's a screen of all the reports you can look at anytime you want. Here's the actions taken to improve the value of this CMMS. So what we're trying to do is first create a thought. Oh, we could use this, and then create an agreement for action, like here's how you do that. Now, I want to make my maintenance workers as great as they can be, always. So by having them deeply involved in the work order, encourages thoughtful approaches to work. It also helps them learn from, past jobs if the notes are there. It helps them identify more subtle cues. And, I'm always a believer in having the people fix things really deeply and profoundly understand how they fail in the first place. And then what works and what doesn't work, and how have others approached similar problems. This is a completely, in my mind, a completely untapped resource where the CMMS can be like a mentor, probably not a mentor, but can help and so that the technicians get better, get more thoughtful, they see a bigger picture. Because you remember, the competence of a technician, anybody, but a technician in particular, is the sum of their skills, knowledge, and attitudes. So you need to have skills, obviously, but you also need to have knowledge about what to apply to what situation. So the CMMS provides comparisons, histories, explanations that all contribute to the person's knowledge and build the muscle of competence. We provide the training, time, and access for the trades to investigate problems. So they're, using this in the most powerful way that they can. Now they say use it or lose it. So the way I'm thinking about this, and this is a long conversation I'm going to distill into like a minute. The first thing is that if your technicians start using the data for things, the data will get better naturally. One of the problems, traditional problems, and this is changing slowly, but it's been a traditional problem, is that people fill out work orders, they type them in, and then they never use that information for anything. Other people use it. The bosses use it, the engineers use it, planners, but not the technicians. So what we want to do is we want to have the technicians use the information. Now, the way I do this is I think about something called a protocol. Now, protocol is a set of steps to get something done. Now, if you break your arm and you go into a hospital and they take an x-ray, the person taking the x-ray is an x-ray tech, and they take a look at what they're supposed to shoot. They'll get a little note from the doctor what they want to look at, and then they go to their protocol book and they open it up and it says wrist, and then it says what settings to put the machine on and what position to put the person in and shoot the picture. So they have like a book of protocols that they follow for any type of x-ray. Now, I'm thinking of the same thing for our senior technicians. So they have some canned protocols for doing some basic analysis that they do themselves. And when they get an answer, they come to the supervisor or the planner with the answer to whatever the protocol is doing. So let's just take one example of this. You could have a protocol, and we used to have one in the CMMSs that looked at component life analysis. So we were looking at, this was in a fleet application, and let's say we wanted to look at alternators. So we would look at all the alternators of the equipment that's in the same class and see if we could learn something about alternator life, particularly within the same class, so it will be the same alternator. Now, that was really useful because we found some problems with Thermo-King units. Those are refrigeration units for trailers. We found some problems that ended up getting a bunch of money back from the manufacturer because of warranty. But the point was that component life analysis can be a pre-designed report where you push the button and you put in the dates or the asset number or whatever, and then the report comes out, and then the technician looks at it and they say, oh, this is interesting, look at what's happening, and then that starts a discussion. So using your data for good increases its value. And one thing that I really want you to really get is to be sure to let other people know about your wins. Maintenance folks, and I assume I'm talking to mostly maintenance folks. Some of you are not really maintenance folks, so that this might not apply to you, but maintenance folks tend to be almost twice as introverted as the general population. I looked at this. I actually studied this. So maintenance folks are twice as introverted as the general population. So what that means is nobody will ever know what cool things the maintenance folks are doing unless you get in their face and make them tell you. So now I'm saying, maintenance folks, I want you to share your wins so that people know that you're on the side of forwarding the mission of the organization. Now, the single biggest thing you can do to make your job easier in maintenance, this is a very specific thing, but it's the single thing that would make the biggest difference in productivity of the team. And that is to distinguish the jobs that you have everything for. So you have, all the jobs in backlog, the total backlog, it's, line, not long. And then there's a subset of those jobs which are available to do because you have the parts on the shelf or you have them kitted, you have the tools, you have the PPE, you have all the stuff you need. So there's a subset of jobs that are available to work on. So the whole issue is to distinguish between those jobs and the total backlog. Your scheduling, if you have any scheduling at all, should only come from this ready backlog group. So this is not an easy thing because it's slippery. It's like a little salamander, slippery, because what happens is you check in the system and the parts are there on the shelf, and then you go get them and they're not on the shelf because either the number is wrong in the system or somebody snatched them before you had a chance. So what we have to do is, if we want to have like high integrity, like high reliability, we really have to take the parts off the shelf and kit them, so we know that we have them. So this is one of the problems of distinguishing the ready backlog, because it may be ready today, but in the middle of the night, somebody snatches something, doesn't tell anybody, and now you're SOL. So, but this is a very huge benefit from a CMMS, and many CMMSs have the capability of distinguishing ready backlog, as a status, a job status. Now, breakdowns. These are the things that we love to hate. But really, maintenance people kind of like a good breakdown. I mean, there's nothing better to have the sun come up just as you get the machine running and you've been working around the clock, and there's such a feeling of satisfaction. So, but the truth is that breakdowns and downtime can be your friend, because when you write up the work order for a breakdown, you want to include all the stuff you used, tools, you want to include spare parts, heavy equipment, all that kind of stuff, so that you can get a sense of, look at all the breakdowns in a small area and get a sense of what breaks and what kind of stuff you use. And maybe you'll do what some people do, where they pre-position tools and spares and materials. So they're pre-positioned. There's, they're in a cabinet. There's a little seal on the cabinet. You break the seal, you go and get the stuff, and the storeroom knows if the seal is broken to check it to see what's been used. You can also use breakdowns to determine what engineering documents you need to have available. And of course, the CMMS can look at a long period of time, and you can use the work order history to develop Pareto charts. Those are charts of what's the most common thing that breaks down, and use that to focus your root cause analysis teams. So all this stuff like breakdowns, one of the things that I want you to get about breakdowns is when something breaks down, it really opens up your eyes to see a world that you normally don't ever see. When something bad happens, it's never just one thing. We know when we do RCAs that there's a whole cascade of things that happened to end up at that one place. And we can actually make the entire system more robust by not just fixing the one thing, but fixing a bunch of the things that are indicated by the cause mapping. So this is where, a breakdown will make you see stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise. Not even like the breakdown, but also other things that might be good to do to make it so that it'd be even less likely to break down. And that's how airplanes got to be so successful and so reliable. It's basically there was a long history of people getting killed from breakdowns, but the industry learned to make them, defense in depth, more robust, things like that. Now, hidden demands are interesting thing in maintenance. In many companies, the only people that are multi-skilled that are left after, right sizing and all the other stuff is maintenance folks. So in some companies, the maintenance folks are moving people's offices, setting up special events, even to the point of doing work in the community. I just had a great situation. I was working on diesel system for Conrail back in the Conrail days. And we were looking at where the diesel was going and we we're trying to figure that out. And it turned out I'm walking around one of these tank farms and I see like a pipe and then a stop of the valve and a hose coming out of the tank farm. So I'm like, what is going on here? Well, it turned out 100 years ago, the YMCAs provided places for the railroad people to stay overnight because they were limited in the amount of time they could work. So they would go to a certain area and then they would stay at the YMCA. Now, in exchange for that, the railroad provided the YMCA's heating oil or diesel fuel, just imagine this. So this went on completely below the surface. Somebody made a deal and then that was it. Nobody thought about it after that. And 100 years later, they have a little, like 1,500 gallon truck, oil truck. They take this hose, they fill it up, and then they go around and they fill up the boilers at the YMCAs. So I just thought that was really great. But what that is a hidden demand. In other words, maintenance people are off the site doing whatever, and it's a legitimate job. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying it's hidden in that it's not needed for maintenance purposes. So when you set up an event, it's great that you set it up. I mean, it really helps the company, but it's not maintenance. And I want to identify any hidden demands. In one case, I was looking for a crew in a manufacturing facility, and it was a private company, and they were at the president's house putting a new floor down for the week that I was there. personally, I have no problem with this. I don't have an opinion about it, whether it's a bad thing or whatever. But what I do want, from the point of view of maintenance, is that I want that to be on a work order on the system so I can identify anything that goes on with maintenance folks that's not maintaining the equipment, improving the equipment. Always have a work order for everything a maintenance person does during the day. Now, the last thing is to use the CMMS to make contribution to the goals and the KPIs of other groups. See, we all have, everybody's got their KPIs, and, it's almost like I don't really, care about you as long as I make my numbers, who cares, but I want to take it to another level because I want to use the CMMS to forward the action for our company's mission. So forward the action for the mission so we can get better value by helping other people win their games. So production, using the CMMS to really identify lost downtime, less downtime, to provide consistent quality. In some cases, we can tweak the equipment to improve the yields. So these are things that, they don't show up in the maintenance KPIs at all. I mean, downtime might be, but not the other stuff. But we can, really forward the action for production by working on these things. Another one for production is latent defect analysis. This is a style of commissioning an asset. And it's going to sound funny. Those of you who don't know about this, it sounds a little crazy, but the way you commission the asset for latent defect analysis is that you take the asset and you start running it faster than it was designed to go. And you keep running it faster and using heavier capacity and more material and until it fails. And then when it fails, you look at what failed and maybe you tweak the engineering of that part and try it again. And the goal is to get the production to run faster, but even more stably than it ran before that. So you find the latent defects, the things that are going to break when you run hot. And so that's a really, it's a common thing in some industries. Help production by identifying adverse operating conditions. It could be that when the humidity is really high, it really messes with the equipment. And that would be something, if we could quantify that and figure out what's going on, we might be able to avoid some of that. We can help cost accounting because, there are some assets which really, when you look at the cost of doing that particular work, there's excessive expenses, and it may not be obvious to the cost accounting people, but it's certainly obvious to the person shoveling the crap it makes. So we can a lot of times contribute to, assets which are excessive. And then stores, the big thing here is in a big inventory of a company in Australia, they identified $3.2 million worth of parts that were either surplus to their needs, like more than a few years supply, or parts that were for assets that were gone, like they had already been retired, but the parts were still there. And there was also some parts for assets that nobody could identify. So this should be an ongoing process to make sure that the stores we have a lot of fights with the stores about getting enough stuff, but we don't want them to have anything that they don't need, that we don't need to take care of this company, this asset. So here's where the rubber meets the road. And, the thing is to start the conversations, start introducing people to what the CMMS does and what it can do and what's available, what's easily available, and maybe even project out 6 months or a year down the road, because if you do this intentionally, your ability to manage this stuff is going to grow exponentially, and you're going to get some analysis that you heretofore was not available to you. And then my challenge to you is, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to go back and do everything you've been doing? Because, like Einstein said, to expect a different result when you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result is a type of insanity. So I know you guys are not insane. So what are you going to do about it? So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And Heather, if you're around in the atmosphere, is there any questions?
Hello, I'm here. Thank you so much, Joel. That was awesome. You do a really wonderful job making some complex topics and concepts easy to understand. So I appreciate that in your presentation. We have one question here from Robert. It says, how can a CMMS help improve safety in a facility, or does a correlation even exist?
Well, the CMMS itself doesn't improve safety. It's when you do things that are safe as a result of the CMMS. So for us, one of the big ways you make a safer job is to plan the job and to mitigate hazards as you're planning. So what we want to do is the CMMS helps facilitate that. Now, according to research by ExxonMobil, a planned job with this mitigation I talked about is like 5 times safer than the same job done as a reactive job without any planning. So that's a huge difference in safety. But it means that you follow the whole process through. And it's not just having a CMMS, it's actually doing what the CMMS supports.
I have a follow-up question maybe in that note. How important is documentation then of, while you're using the CMMS, of preparing for different work orders? I know you mentioned legal situations sometimes, and I think safety ties in there too, but my question is, how important is it to have everything documented?
Well, documentation is a great thing, and it's also the bane of our existence. If you would have a lawyer sitting in the room and how they want stuff documented, you're never going to get any work done. So we have to kind of compromise with this stuff and find a place that makes sense for the type of business we're in. For example, when you make airbags, for automobiles, you're required to keep your documentation, like your repair orders and everything, for 30 years. 30 years is what's required if you make that kind of, because 25 years from now, there could be a lawsuit and they're going to want to find out what machine it was run on and what the conditions were and everything else. So you want to have documentation that's appropriate for your business. And certainly if you're in any of the businesses, like if you happen to make vaccines, they're going to want your maintenance documentation, probably up until 2100. I don't know. But so you have to be reasonable about it. And doing a halfway decent job will handle most of the problems.
Yeah, definitely. Another question here, how do you see the CMMS in IoT 4.0 era, maybe Industry 4.0 era?
Yeah, that's really, I think it's going to be fascinating as this unfolds, because when you look at the big companies, the IBMs and such, they're building Industry 4.0 with analytics and certain amount of AI into the CMMS. So when this stuff is all moving in fits and starts, because there's hundreds of vendors, each one having a piece of the action. But I believe that it'll end up that the CMMS is going to be where the action is. And all the prescriptive maintenance where, the IoT stuff will bring in sensor readings, and then a work order will come out to say, change that bearing before Tuesday. That'll be a prescriptive work order that'll come out of the CMMS. And I believe that that's in process now and will become a bigger part of our lives as time goes on.
Very cool. Hard to say quite yet, but sure will be interesting to see it all kind of unfold. Next question here, and I apologize if there's some background noise from outside right now. Next question here is, how can I optimize a CMMS with lubrication scope? Any advice there?
Yeah, lubrication was always a hard one for the CMMS, and the reason was that the original systems were written to be asset based. So there was, you had one asset, you had one work order. But lubrication that's not how you do that. You have routes for lubrication. You may be dealing with, 100 different asset numbers. So some of the systems built accessories that will help you do lubrication and manage it and keep track of it. But, it's one of those things you have to look at the system itself. Remember, the very first system in the world in 1965 was basically to manage lubrication in fork trucks. And, it was a wild success for that era. So it's not that it can't be done. It's just that it's the model that they're using is not completely compatible, but a lot of vendors have taken care of that by now.
Awesome. We have a follow-up question, I think, around IoT and CMMS. The question is, do you think that with IoT there will be more false positives with CMMS notifications?
Man, you're getting into an area that is really, really hardcore, because you absolutely will have more false positives and false negatives as the sensitivity of the sensor goes up. So it's like an absolute rule that the more sensitive the sensor, the more false positives and false negatives. So that is absolutely going to be part of the picture. We already have that. We already have situations where, good vibration analysis says, hey, you have a problem with this bearing, and you take the whole thing apart and there's no problem with the bearing at all, because that was a false positive. So you want to be, as maintenance people, you want to always be talking about false positives and false negatives, just like they do in medicine. If the doctor says to you, you have some disease, there's a 1 to 20% chance that it's a false positive. The doctor knows that. So usually they don't tell you until they follow it up with some other test, which, makes it more accurate. And we have to get into the habit of doing that also. But you're right on course with that. It's an issue that I think is under talked about.
Awesome. Well, just to clarify, it's certainly not me. It's our wonderful audience here today with all of these thoughtful questions. So the credit goes straight to them. Another question here from Russell: who is authorized to write in work orders?
Okay, this is a good thought exercise to go through. Typically, what you want is anyone can write a work request or notification. So that wants to be a wide funnel. But to turn it into a work order should be somebody in the maintenance area. I call that job control. Other people don't call it that. The supervisor just turns it into a work order, or the planner or whatever. But it's an important function because the person is looking at the work request. One, they don't pass it if it doesn't have all the information you need. They don't pass it if it's not authorized work. They don't pass it if there's already a work order in the system for it. So it's like they're gatekeepers, job controls, gatekeepers. They also look at the work request. If it's an emergent job, they might send it right to the shop floor. So the direct answer is I'd like to gather all my information through work requests and then have somebody with a maintenance eye turn them into work orders after they're vetted for certain things.
Just reading a little bit. Thank you for your answer. Very helpful. So I think the follow-up from that question, or the statement from that question says, so CMMS is a tool to better manage maintenance. Everything depends on the organization pattern regarding the success of it. Having some champions in the organization is then important too now.
The short answer is absolutely yes. The longer answer is the CMMS is just a bunch of code that does some things if you put the right things in. Without good usage, good business policies and procedures, you've got nothing.
Yeah. I think a similar question here to the last couple of questions is, in the case that there's any conflict in CMMS findings versus any other department, maybe other than maintenance, who then has the authority to make a decision on the course of action?
Okay, so that's going to depend on what kind of problem it is. If accounting says that you spent more money than you should have on spare parts, and the CMMS says you didn't, I would probably go with accounting. If accounting says that you repaired this too many times and the CMMS says you didn't, I would probably go with the CMMS. So it really depends on what kind of problem it is. But unfortunately, the integrity of the database in most CMMSs is relatively low. So virtually anyone else has better numbers than the CMMS. And that's the thing I've been talking about trying to change, because we want the CMMS to be a really, really valuable system. And the only way that happens is if we get cooperation from everybody internally, and then we get people using it externally, and then it starts to become a trusted source of information. There's more to say on that, but I don't.
Yeah. There's always more to say, though, huh? I think that's a helpful answer and hopefully a good start. Yeah. A comment here that says your experience is proven through the way you're explaining questions. So I second that one. I have one more question here. I see any ideas on how to document a stock out on a CMMS work order?
Any ideas how to document a stock out? Well, presumably the part of the system that manages the storeroom would be documenting the stock out. This is a very annoying situation. We talk about service levels of like 97% on critical spares. And that's really great, except that when you have 15 parts on a job, 97% service level, because of the way you do this, the probabilities, ends up being you have a 63% chance of being able to do that job, because it's 90.97 times 0.97 15 times. So stockouts are a huge problem for maintenance. And one of the reasons why I harp on the ready backlog so much and kitting stuff is so that we can eliminate the stockout problem before we start the job. It becomes much more expensive to fix it after the job starts. But we can put off the job easier than we can stop the job halfway done. Heather, I don't know whether I just went off into something that did that sound like I was answering the question?
I think so. I think it sounds like it's maybe more of a precursor to actually going into the CMMS than quite documenting it throughout the CMMS in an ideal situation.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. In the CMMS in upkeep, does that do the inventory side also? Do you know?
Yes, there's a parts inventory purchase order section modules.
Yeah, so that module will keep track of stockouts in some way, and that should be accessible to the CMMS. I was actually, now I remember, I was going off on this whole problem of stockouts because that's people don't realize that even though they have relatively good numbers, they still could be messing up the jobs because of the probability of the way things work. So.
Awesome. I'm hearing that my video is gone, so hopefully you can still hear me.
I can.
Great. I think that actually wraps up the questions we had submitted. I appreciate the audience taking the time to send through questions. Joel, I appreciate your willingness to answer questions for the last 15 minutes or so there. And thank you once again for this presentation. It was just absolutely wonderful, and the conversation that followed as well. So we'll leave it there for today. Any final words, Joel?
Thank you very much. And what are you going to do about it when you get back to work?
There we go.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel, and to everyone who joined us today. We will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.